we're doing questions, etc. So that'll also give people a couple of minutes who are running late to join us. Okay, everyone, I'm Marissa Brown. I'm the Assistant Director for Programs at the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage. Welcome to our ongoing lunch talk series, Public Humanities Now. I have the pleasure of introducing Karyn Olivier, and probably when people saw what Karyn would be talking about, they thought we must have gotten in touch with her very quickly over the last 2 weeks as we saw all the Confederate monuments come down, because she has been thinking about and working on the issue of contemporary monument making for a long time. But in fact, I reached out to Karyn before COVID, maybe, or maybe right after COVID hit. So I will introduce Karyn, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how we'll run the questions at the end. So Karyn is a Philadelphia-based artist who was born in Trinidad and Tobago, who creates monuments, memorials, and visual art installations that intersect and collapse multiple histories and memories with present-day narratives, reinterpreting the role of monuments in public space. Her work has been exhibited at the Gwangju and Busan Biennials, the World Festival of Black Arts and Culture in Dakar, Senegal, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Whitney Museum of Art, MoMA P.S.1, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the Mattress Factory, among others. She is a 2019 Pew Fellow, a recent American Academy in Rome Fellow, and is currently an Associate Sculpture Professor at Tyler School of Art and Architecture. Olivier received her MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art and her BA from Dartmouth College. And she'll share work that she's doing now, I think, that everyone will be really excited to see and sort of hear about how she thinks about monuments. So just a quick note about questions. As we're listening to Karyn, if you have any questions, the way we'll do questions is you can just send me a note in the chat box. The chat is set so that it will only go to the co-hosts. So you don't need to spell out your question. Just let me know you have one and I'll chat back to you, let you know what number you are in the queue. And when we get to you, I will unmute you so that it's a little bit less virtual and anonymous, and you can ask Karyn your question yourself. And I think that's it. I'm just, Karyn, really excited to have you. Thanks for making the time.
Oh, of course.
And we're all really excited to see more of your work and hear from you. So thanks a lot for being here.
Right. Dartmouth folks would be upset because I just turned down doing a panel because the date was wrong. I can't tell them I'm talking to Brown. So it's about 25 minutes, he said, right? So I have about 4 projects or 5. And if we can't get to the 5th one, that's fine. So screen has been shared. No, did we share the screen? No, not yet. Okay. Okay. So I guess we'll dive right in. My background, I didn't study art. I studied psychology at Dartmouth, and I think having a non-art background has kind of led me to kind of think potentially in a different way, since I never learned how to do things properly. But I'm going to start with this project at the University of Kentucky, which is actually, I just finished writing an op-ed that I'm hoping to get published about what's going on with this mural. So this is a 1934 New Deal era fresco by Anne Rice O'Hanlon. She was charged with making a fresco at Memorial Hall at the University of Kentucky that represents the history of Kentucky. And it's been at the center of debate and controversy for, I would say, 2 decades by now. Some of the Black students wanted to be removed. Of course, the fresco, so that's complicated. But I mean, the problems with the fresco are pretty obvious. Oh, what's going on? Why can't I get forward? Oh, I have to use this. It shows a pretty sanitized version of history. It doesn't reveal the brutality of slavery. I do think there's some progressive things. There was somewhat of progressive thinking, I think, with her, because she did position the slaves in the center. I think there's certain pairings, like this man with a gun with this couple nearby. But then you have offensive things like the sole Native American is kind of lurking in the forest. The musicians playing for the white elite. You have the boy up in the tree not having access to the performance venue. So the president didn't know what to do. There was all this talk about what to do. So the president in 2015 decided, let's just cover it over. And for as long as we need, he put a 2-year period for the community to figure out what to do, meaning the community within the university and the community at large. So the decision was to have an artist come in and make a work that would be made in conversation. And this work would act as a catalyst, a tool, or work as a way to kind of a new lens to see this mural. So the idea, so this is the lobby. So that white sheet is kind of the length of where the mural is housed. So in the vestibule in the room prior, when you first enter, is this dome ceiling. And I'm going to just show another image so you get a sense of the space. They actually wanted the artist to use that big white wall, but then I thought about when you enter the lobby, you're looking horizontally. So, and then there's a dome ceiling. It seemed kind of crazy not to use a dome ceiling that's there. So I decided to make the piece, incorporate the dome ceiling and that taupe color. I decided to kind of make the whole thing an installation. And that taupe color is kind of derived from like an aggregate of the marble. And then there are these 4 medallions I decided to use as well. So so that door you see is leading to the lobby. So what I did was I gold leafed the ceiling and recreated all of the brown and black figures from the mural. So these figures that were once anonymous are now kind of elevated to the sublime. I was definitely thinking about Renaissance and Byzantine churches and how, even though there's a lot of problematics with them, I kind of consciously wanted, what would it mean for them to kind of be elevated to the divine, to the space of religious and spirituality. I was also thinking about them as constellations. I was thinking about Sun Ra. But I was thinking that I wanted to use a material, gold leaf made sense because one, it would have that relationship to the divine and to the elevation. You know, the subjugated are elevated, but I also thought about it being a complicated material. We know that gold was stolen from sub-Saharan Africa. So I wanted a material that could be complicated. I was thinking it is a university, so it will have repeat viewing. So it'd be a site where different students, different departments can kind of engage it, be it economics, be it art history. So around the base of the dome, I have a Frederick Douglass quote that says, there's not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. So you have one scene of the mural has this horse carriage driver taking a rest. And I decided to place him in the dome ceiling near this slave with the sickle. And I kind of wanted to create like a subtle, this surreal kind of horror scene, like if he's floating and drifts down. So I wanted something that could allude to a violence. I started calling this group of folks who aren't allowed to be on the train. I kept calling them the witnesses, and that kind of led to the title of the piece, Witness. I was thinking too that I wanted a title that could be like an active word. It could talk about what does it mean to have to confront the complicated histories. And I thought, what would it mean to have a title where one day you could kind of not pay attention and miss it, but the next day, once you see it, it kind of asks you to be present and to think about your position right now, force you to think about the future and also the past. Where are you positioned within this? So in the 4 medallions, I decided to add, I was doing research of kind of under-recognized but really important figures in Kentucky history. This is Georgia Davis Powers. She was the first African-American and first woman to represent the state in the Senate, and she did a lot of work starting bills against discrimination, sex discrimination, race discrimination. This is Chief Redbird, who was a Native American who lived peacefully among the white settlers. He was murdered by 2 Tennessee men who were never brought to trial. This is a Black silhouette depiction that I had to kind of conjure of Peter DeRed, a former slave, and at the time of his death, he had one of the largest congregations of a church. He started the African Baptist Church, and it had the largest congregation at the time. And I was thinking about the fact that I had to use a Black silhouette. Again, in contemporary art, we all know of Kara Walker's use of it, but I was thinking about at the time when he was alive, it was the beginning invention of photography. but it also spoke to, so not everyone had access to that, but I was also thinking about Black silhouette as a representation, way of representing people, but it also was thinking about, I mean, if you were of a certain status and class, and if you weren't Black, there's a chance that there would have been representation of you, be it a drawing or a painting. So I was thinking about, what does it mean that I had to kind of imagine who he was and made this rendering. But it also, of course, speaks about the archive, who gets to be in the archive. And this is representing Charlotte Dupuy, who was a slave who, her slave owner, Henry Clay, was at a certain point appointed to be Secretary of State. So he went to DC, and when he came back, she refused to be a slave again and then was sent to prison. So she kind of has this was a precursor to the Dred Scott case. So, you know, I was thinking about a dome ceiling, like I was thinking about, what does it mean that a dome ceiling actually was built in a building of higher education? I think about dome ceilings having related to prehistory. Dome ceilings are kind of from a disparate cultures use them. So I was thinking, what would it mean for you to kind of now see this thing that you might not notice or pay attention to, and all of a sudden consider, like, what can its meaning be here? But it was really important for me for the piece to not kind of tie it up in a bow, and I had to do all these presentations in front of different constituents for the project. They kept saying, well, don't you know gold was stolen? I was like, yes, that's why I chose it. And so the piece was up, and it was congratulatory. Everyone loved it. It's a really beautiful piece. But I said to them, and I was leaving for Rome, I said, there has to be programming. Like, this piece wasn't about tying it up in a bow. This piece was, now that my piece has been made, now how do you take these two works and have them work? How do you make programming that could talk about the complexity of this? And it didn't happen. So now, actually, the president, in the wake of what's going on, and people have been calling for it to come down, the president's decided to remove it. So I've written a letter to the president, who hasn't responded, but now I'm kind of working on this op-ed that I hope could be. Because I keep thinking there's certain things about the bigoted representations in art, which ones need to stay that we can use to remember, which have to go, like Confederate monuments have to go, Columbus statues obviously should never been built. But are there works that we can talk about and use the way Holocaust Museum uses them? And I feel as though this is one, but I feel as though the university chose not to do the work. You know, they kind of, again, assumed like the Band-Aid was enough, but of course the Band-Aid eventually, you know, loses its adhesion. Okay, so the next project I'm going to show, it was part of Monument Lab, which was this public art and history project that was run by, that's still continuing, by Paul Farber, this historian and Ken Lum, an artist based in Philadelphia. So in 2017, they asked 20 artists to make works in 20 different parks and plazas. And the call was to make I guess the question was, what's an appropriate monument for the city of Philadelphia? And we were asked to make these prototypes. So I decided to do a work in my neighborhood park. This is Vernon Park in Germantown, a historic area of Philadelphia. And in the far corner of the park, which bums me out, it's like in the far corner, is this monument dedicated to Francis Daniel Pistorius. He was an early German settler. Eventually the neighborhood is called Germantown because of the German settlers. In 1688, he led the first Quaker protest against slavery. So we're talking almost 200 years before it was abolished. And I found out that during World War I and II, this monument was boxed over. There was talk that the look was too dramatic. Again, it makes me think of today, like this foreigner, the xenophobia. So I thought about that. I was thinking about that. And then I thought, in the center, very prominent in the park, is the Battle of Germantown Memorial. And this is a monument dedicated to George Washington. It was the only battle fought in Philadelphia, and it was a failed battle. We lost that battle. But of course, it speaks to who gets to have a monument. George Washington, president, founding father. So it speaks to whose memory do we hold on to? So I thought about George Washington at the time of the battle was fighting for America's freedom from British rule, but at the same time he owned slaves. So what would it mean for me to think about George Washington fighting for our freedom, owning slaves, and a foreigner, this German, fighting for Black Americans who weren't free? So I thought of, like, how can I think about these as make a conversation between these two histories? At the time, I was also researching on the talking statues of Rome, which are these 16th century statues. There are 8 of them. And people would post notes on them. And they were these sites for people to kind of critique the government, critique the papal authority at the time. And people would put notes on one and maybe one another. And I was thinking about the idea of these shifting authors in different times. And I was thinking that these 2 monuments could kind of do that. So I decided to transcribe the history of the Francis Daniel Pistorius monument onto the George Washington Memorial. So I covered it, but I decided that it wouldn't be enough to just kind of transcribe that history. And I thought, how can I make it speak about today and how I think about monuments? So I mirrored it. So on one level, it's reflecting the demographics of today. It's a predominantly Black neighborhood. But I was thinking about the problem with monuments often is that they're partly because of materiality, the stone, their heaviness. They present themselves with a certain sort of reverence. The weightiness of material speaks to it being like almost like this, the end of the period at the end of the sentence, like it's a closed conversation, or it's an absolute. It almost speaks about it being a universal when we know it's a singular perspective. So I thought if it was mirrored, it's constantly shifting. At every moment it's shifting. It's never sitting still. And I go back to that seminal text by the anti monuments. What's his name? He did the study of all those German anti-fascist monuments. And I was thinking his whole thing was like the monument, in order for it to function, it has to be kind of in this perpetual resolution. If we're making the monument do all the memory work for us, we don't have to pay attention. So I was thinking that this monument was doing that, the fact that it was never sitting still. I was also thinking, even though it's 20 feet tall, the mirror kind of makes you, you're aware of like the different axes. You're thinking about what you see is above and behind you, in front of you. And all of a sudden that kind of automatic thing of looking up has kind of dissipated. From one entrance of the park, my entrance, it seemed to disappear, it was invisible. And I wanted it to be in conversation with the Confederate monument debate. And the piece was actually installed a week before the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville. So the piece is called Battle is Joined, and kind of all of a sudden it had another kind of call to arms in light of that incident. And I was thinking about, it was funny, I did remember doing a PBS NewsHour interview, and I remember them saying, well, couldn't that be the solution to all the Confederate monuments? And I have so many people emailing me saying, look, they're boxing it over, it's like your piece. And I'm thinking, yes, on one level that could work, but for me, why this piece was interesting, I think the piece as itself can work, especially for a poor neighborhood where I had people say to me, how could this piece that's so expensive be built here? And then when I say to them, what does it mean that you're saying that only things that cost money should exist in fancy neighborhoods? What does it mean that I'm allowing us to see ourselves here? What does it mean that I had like a former Marine who clearly was an alcoholic? I'd see him every day at the park, and he would kind of nod at me. And one day he comes to me and says, I had to kill that Marine, I had to kill that woman and child, and just was sobbing. Like the piece allowed people to see themselves. So I was thinking like, oh, I kind of lost my train of thought. But I was thinking like, how could I make this work that allows, that wasn't me if it's reflective in a way we see ourselves and in a way we become the monument, and what is kind of my responsibility in that? I went to a poetry reading that the Monument Lab had kind of set up, and they asked a couple of poets to read poems that they've written that could be potentially related to the themes of monuments or identity and history. And then while I'm there, I realized that a woman starts to read a poem, and I realize it's based on this piece. So I'm gonna play that now, hopefully.
Monuments of Brown Boys. The artist installed a mirror over the monument, and the people have come to gawk. Rubberneckers wonder what was there before, and you have come too, laying in the cut, statue still for seconds. Your reflection edging off a 20-foot high bronze looking glass. You are an alluring hunk of stone beguiling me. Yes, you, brown boy, rough cut, monolith. I see you. You are a low-slung jean-wearing grandmother greeting pillar, an obelisk marking the entrance of your hood. You need to be somebody's memorial, not only when you laid out and lowered in the dirt, your pillow or marble headrest of past tense. He was, he once, he lived. No, you are now in present, alive and in color, and you need to be somebody's walking shrine, somebody's testament, somebody's tribute in this city. You have to be carved, stretched, and erect, a column to buttress boogeymen, the phantoms they say you imagine, the specters and goblins who told bullets and policies and laws that encase you. You need to be somebody's memento. Look how you beaming off that seeing glass. I'm catching your shine. Look at that swagger you carrying, hoodie wearing, fresh fade having, full teeth grinning. You need to be somebody's something to fight for, somebody's celebration, somebody's stone turned monument, carved and smooth, our masterpiece in this city.
Okay, so this is a project I did with Creative Time in Central Park, and I think it was the first public artwork since the Christo pieces back, I think like 20 something years ago. So I was it was kind of daunting to the idea of making something in Central Park. So I decided to just think about what was there. So then I was researching the history of New York City and the park, and I was thinking about, how the Wisconsin Glacier kind of passed through New York City like 20,000 years ago, and kind of what you see, the evidence, the rock formations, everything you see is kind of a result of that time. And I was thinking about how it's there in plain sight, but if you don't know it to look for it, you don't know it's there. I was also thinking about a more recent history, and I think now they're actually about to do a memorial for Senegal Village. Senegal Village was a middle-class community of freed Blacks who owned property. Later on, some German pig owners became part of it. And I found out that when the decision was made to build Central Park, they claimed the right of eminent domain and to destroy this community. So they were pretty much displaced and scattered kind of wholesale throughout the city, and there's very little evidence of their tenancy left. I was able to go to the archives, and I went through and I found, I was seeing like dishes, and I thought I'd use this as an element. So I decided to create, I should go back, I decided to create a three flip lenticular billboard structure. So again, something that's an image, but it's kind of shifting. So we have this is representing the Wisconsin Glacier from 20,000 years ago, this from Seneca Village. And then the third image was of the site today, where the site exactly where the billboard was housed. And I was thinking about different things. I was thinking, what would it mean to have a billboard image that's shifting? So all of a sudden, it's almost like a time travel piece. When you're across the lake, it really shifted from one image, from the glacier, morphed into the plate, and then morphed into the present day. And I was thinking, what would it mean for you to kind of consider that? But I was thinking, what would it mean to have to consider two different scales, like the larger than life monumentality and the sublime of a glacier to be positioned against a domestic plate, like the most intimate thing? What would it mean for me to equate their importance or their weight and their meaning? But I was also thinking from where you were positioned, so you had these kind of crazy fragmentations which speak about history, and then I was also thinking about, like, in a way, like we think about history in this linear way, and this is kind of this non-linear presentation. So you had these two kind of split together, and I liked how when you moved around it or how close you kind of dictated how you received or saw history. You also had periods where it would be so condensed, but all of a sudden, like 20,000 years of time, all of a sudden were compressed. Okay, maybe I'll just show this one piece. I have two more projects, but I'll only show this one. So this is a project that I'm working on now that should be installed, and we're backed up. We're supposed to be completed by September, but we're hoping it'll be done by November. So in Philadelphia, this neighborhood, Nicetown, is housed this Stenton House. Stenton House was owned by James Logan, who was an important historic figure here. He was a right-hand man of Willie Penn. At one point, he was the governor. This intellectual, I mean, he's done a lot of amazing things in a way for Philadelphia, but he also owned slaves. So the story goes that during the war, Revolutionary War, Dinah, this former slave, but then at that point was a servant, the British soldiers were sent in that neighborhood, in that community, to burn down the houses. So two of the soldiers entered the house and told her, gather your things, we've been charged to burn down this mansion, and where can I find hay? So she sent them to the barn to get hay. As it happens, the police come and say, we're looking for deserters. So she's like, oh, the deserters are in the barn. So they get arrested and Stenton is saved. So in the 1919, she was finally honored with this plaque in memory of Dinah, the faithful colored caretaker of Stenton, who by her quick thought and presence of mind saved the mansion from being burned by British soldiers in the winter of 1777. So there's been talk about how on one level it's great that she was honored, but when you see this plaque, this memorial, it's all about what she did for them. There's no recognition about her, who she was, or anything. So I was asked, there was a couple of artists who were finalists, and I was chosen to create a memorial. And I was having the hardest time because there was so little that was known about her. I kept asking questions, kept asking myself questions that had no answers. And of course it speaks about, 400 years of subjugation and who gets to be remembered, the fact that we don't even know her last name. So I thought, what can I do? They wanted us to make a sculpture, but I decided I'd make an installation. And this isn't exactly how it's going to look like. Those slabs are much wider. But I decided I'd make this seating area, and on each side would be two sets of questions. One set of questions are directed as if the viewer is asking Dinah, and on the other side, as if you are asking Dinah the question. So this reversal, so this kind of authors and these questions happening, I guess, in your imagination, but I also think people could be there. So the questions, for example, may I ask you, Dinah, what was your full name? Where were you born and how did you arrive here? Because there's still no knowledge of how she ended up there as a slave. How did freedom feel? Because during her time as Stenton, she was a slave and then she was free. What was your greatest joy and your greatest sorrow? Did you have a favorite part of every day? What was your wildest dream? Who took care of you? Who and what did you think of most as you grew old? Did you ever wish you had let it burn? How do you wish to be remembered? So then on the other side, may I ask you, what is your name? Where were you born and what led you here? Do you feel free? Which is an important question, particularly for that neighborhood, which is a pretty economically depressed neighborhood. And again, the same questions, but turned in the present days. Who takes care of you? Who and what do you think of most as you grow older? How would you have saved Stenton? And how would you wish to be remembered? So I'm hoping that it allows a way to keep her memory, keep her in our inability to answer these questions. We're keeping her alive in our memory, and maybe in asking those questions, we are asking them about ourselves and thinking about memorials as this kind of living history. And in a way, again, it could keep on shifting. And my hope is that maybe some of those answers will come about over time. Maybe we will unearth something. Like they actually now think they know exactly where, coming close to thinking they know where she was buried, which is kind of amazing for me because it's near where my monument will be. And then I decided I wanted to reinsert the history of that plaque. So I decided on the outside, sorry, this was like an earlier rendering of what it was going to look like. I decided to insert the plaque, and I thought about the outside the exterior being kind of like the more traditional commemorative public space, while the questions inside are like the more intimate ones. So I'm going to have this plaque on the outside, but then I thought it'd be interesting to have another plaque on the other side. So the plaque on the other side, I'm having two quotes, one from Alice Walker that says, "Healing begins where the wound was made." And the other one is by Lorraine Hansberry that says, "Never be afraid to sit a while and think." And that's kind of hoping as an invitation. And I had one other project, but I don't think we have time for it. So that's it. I'll unshare my screen.
Thank you so much. We have a first question from Erica Wheeler, and I'm gonna go ahead and find you in the lineup, Erica, so I can unmute you, who also, after I told her had the first question, said, "This is the most amazing presentation. I'm so glad you guys are recording it as well." Let's see. Okay. Erica?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah. Should I come on video too?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Oh, this was so fabulous. Thank you so much. I'm new to your work and it's fabulous. The layers, the ideas. Oh my God. So I have a question which is just general, and I just, I'll just say I wonder how you approach some of these things as teaching objects for the context of the time in which they were created. Do you know what I'm asking? Like, I'm wondering if like exploring, like, the one you just showed, like where it says that language, like faithful colored caretaker, right? And so that's an example of a context of a time of the way things were spoken about that you're doing healing and reparation work around. But I'm wondering, yeah, and it seems like you're playing with it, you're like responding to it. And so
Yeah,
I wonder if you could talk.
I mean, some people, I mean, of course I had community meetings and some people thought, get rid of that, we don't want that part of it. And of course the Historical Society, they like that I included it to me. But to me, I'm thinking it makes sense to include the history. Like, how do we understand, how do we not understand? We have to have access to the past to kind of reinterpret it. And I like the idea for this piece. Why I like it is it could work for like school groups. I like that, what I said at the end, that the answers, some of those answers might come about. So I'm hoping all of my objects, all the works I do around this could be, I don't know if I'm answering right, these teaching tools, but the fact that history it has to be written in pencil, like that's like the cliche, but that's true. So how do I kind of leave that space or leave that room for the question? I mean, like someone said I should have had the question, would you have let it burn be at the last question? But to me, that feels too defined. That almost like I've almost set up my position or set up my assumed position. So how do I leave things where the personal answers could keep shifting? Or even like the mirrored monument. There was one day I went in the beginning of December, and it was an icy cold day and the leaves were gone and it looked like a fascist monument. And it was crazy that this piece, when it was surrounded with, I mean, there were prayer circles that happened around that thing. Kids would like dance, and all of a sudden that monument shifted. But I thought that's interesting too, especially like right now, I feel like we're approaching, there's a push for us to become a fascist nation. So to me, like I'm okay with things keep revealing themselves. But I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Oh, you did. Yeah, no, and then the second question I was going to ask you kind of answered in the last piece, but it was about offering new context that's diverse by the people who are visiting. And so I think by engaging with questions and the different ways. Yeah. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Dietrich, I think you've got a question as well. And let me just unmute you here so you can ask that.
Bye.
Just give me one sec.
Okay, I should be on.
Yeah, power.
All right, great. I think mostly I just want to say how much I loved your work and how fantastic I thought your connections to history and to place were. I found it really convincing. I wanted to ask about maybe the first and the second one in terms of the dialogue you create that was so compelling in that golden dome with the sort of quotations from that mural. And you mentioned before, I think, that the mural was covered up.
And now it's covered over again.
And now it's,
yeah.
So the question was how, for someone who comes into that space and to get the full weight of your installation, I think obviously it's useful to see what was there before and what you referred to, right? If someone doesn't know it, is that something that you had hoped the programming of the university would give access to, or how does that work in the sort of daily encounters with this amazing work?
I mean, there's some people stood up, didn't pay attention, and I think it's interesting, some people didn't like look up. I mean, I was hoping that because it's such a contested mural, that the university would do the work of different kind of programming, would encourage different programs to kind of engage it, different departments. And I had said to them, I don't expect everyone to like it, and it's not gonna solve this. And in that way that institutions do, they thought, we got a Black artist and she's gay too, to cover it, to make it even better, we took care of this. And again, it speaks of the failure of like, they want the quick, in a way, my piece, you made it a quick fix when it was a way to start the work. So to me, and now that's the whole thing. Now it's, if you remove it, you've rendered my piece blind and mute. My piece doesn't exist without its history. Like the past is only, like there's this great quote, what's that, this Haitian anthropologist, the past is only the past because there's a present. It's only, like we have to have that to be in conversation. So literally, I'm going to have to deinstall. I'm going to literally have to take that piece down and have to figure out. I want to then do some sort of performative thing of taking that down to use it again, because that speaks about this crazy moment we're in, where the quick thing was like, okay, let's take it down. That'll appease someone. I'm like, but that's the least of your problems. There's food insecurity on your campus. You have so few faculty of color. Like, that is, okay, quick. What does that do? That was actually a tool you could have used to rally around and have like discourse and deal with polemics. Like, polemics, it's not a bad thing, you know? So.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're saying that. We, at the John Nicholas Brown Center, there's a sort of comparable issue where I think this sort of discourse becomes so important. But I really like that piece. I think I recognized whom you referred to earlier, which is who talked exactly about this point, James Young, about right, about the work really starting. You can't just have the memorial shoulder the work of commemorating and thinking about it, but it has to start with that, right? So
it makes me mad because I left to do the Rome Prize, the Rome Fellow, and they're like, oh, bummer, if you were going to be here, we brought you here to do that. And I was like, oh, well, do it, and I'll come next year when I'm back. And to think, again, you put the labor on me. Like, since I wasn't here, somehow you thought you couldn't do the work. Like, do the work. Like, do it without me. It's so important for you to do it.
Right on. Great. Thank you so much. Really.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Karyn. I had a question too. I love your work and love the presentation, and it was really fun. I've seen so much of your work online, but to get to hear you talk about it. How do you think about the, sort of how do you think about which monuments or murals or public art should come down and which should stay, and sort of be either contextualized or be critiqued and responded to by artwork like yours? How do you think about kind of where to draw the line? And then I'm also wondering why you think at this moment monuments have such kind of important role and valence in how we right now, I think, I love what you said about living history. I mean, it feels like we're in a moment where we are really, really redefining American history and identity. And so the monuments seem to be a place where we are doing a lot of that critical thinking.
Right.
So why do you see that, and sort of where do you
I
draw?
just found a quote that I'm starting my op-ed with. That's Henry Louis Gates wrote that censorship is to art as lynching is to justice. But I think that there's certain, Confederate monuments, to me, we know when they weren't made at that time, they were made in Jim Crow. We know that they were used as tools of intimidation. We knew that they started in the cemeteries, but very quickly they were put into the public. So we know, and then the resurgence of them in the civil rights era. So, and even one as recently as 1980 something, I forgot where. So we know that, so I think about those were statements of power, right? They were not about celebrating that. So to me, those are the guys. And then I think about a lot of them were just not great sculptures, but I think, yes, some of those should be preserved in museums. But in the public square, I think they all have to go. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe at this point, the Rizzo statue came down. That needed to come down so long ago. The history of Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia and the terror he brought on the Black communities before my time of living in Philadelphia. How dare you have him at the seat of City Hall? And finding the Frank Rizzo mural, I didn't know if that was going to go away because the Mural Arts kind of was responsible for it. And that's in a very Italian, somewhat still racist area. And that came down. But that to me, it had to. So some of them, but these artworks, I was researching when I was writing my letter to the president of University of Kentucky, I was researching that big one in that San Francisco high school, the George Washington High School. And they've been flip-flopping. It was like at one point, it was definitely coming down. And then all of a sudden the NAACP in San Francisco said, what are you doing? You can't take it down. And then someone's like, well, if you look at the artist's history, he actually was being political about that. So I think something like that, but you can't just leave it there. What do you do when you have a student says they're being triggered? It's like, University of Kentucky Memorial Hall, the plan at some point was like, why don't we change Memorial Hall to not a space where students have to have classes if they're being triggered by seeing the forced slaves in the central location, make it like a center. And I'm like, that's the thing, like make that a center to talk about memorials and memory, and a site to talk about race and like, yeah, take it on, like make that be the site. And of course that takes money that they don't want to spend, it takes curating, it takes all the work. So it's brought up as that's how we should convert this space. And in a way, it's like everyone wants the easy way. Just take the take the mural down. Like that's who does that serve? What is silent? Like the choice. Like there's all of a sudden it seems as though there's a choice between like censorship and racial justice. It's like, huh? Like what? Like can't we hold two opposing things in one's hand, right? And which ones should they be? This mural. There's some problem. There are problematics for sure in it. But to erase that, I can't equate it to a Confederate monument. I can't equate it to Christopher Columbus, who almost like brought to extermination the Aboriginals of South America and the Caribbean, where I'm from. You know what I mean? There's no comparison. So to me, there's some things that are just black and white, like obvious. And others, I'm like, okay, what's that Orwell quote about? Like you take away the song, you take away the, like certain things do need to be taken away. I even think about the Gone with the Wind, a film I will never see. But it's supposed to be a cinematic masterpiece. I think it's right that they took it down, and now they're going to figure out what's the context? What's the dialogue to have people know what we should consider? No, it would make no sense to get rid of that film, but create a context for it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm sure also let us know when the op-ed comes out, because I'll email out. I'm sure everyone is going to want to read it.
Hopefully someone will take it.
Someone will take it. When are you almost close to finishing?
Yeah, I have to add, I said my wife's an editor, and it's hard because it's like an op-ed should only be about 800 pages, but so I'm trying to focus on the censorship part, like how anti-intellectual this is and what does it mean. But there is another part, and I don't know how to fit it in, where in your act of being politically correct and trying to serve some of the Black community, you never even told me. I found out by the letter that you sent out to the community that my piece, so it's this weird liberal PC-ness, but not understanding the levels of racism. Like, you were okay with not saying anything to me, a Black queer female artist. Like, how could, like, we're at this moment, like, you didn't recognize the problematics of not even girl, we're gonna have to take this thing down. I know. Not even like, so I think about that kind of subtle racism, like not in this, like not being able to see the spokes of the wheel, only one, like that's the big one. Yeah, take it down, they're forced slaves. But I'm an artist you commissioned, and you didn't consider that taking that down means an important work of mine has been erased and I've been dismissed. Like you didn't even consider me in the thing. So it's but it was getting so wordy. I'm like, okay, I'll leave that part. Maybe it'll be obvious, that part of Black artists. She's been rendered mute. Like, hopefully people, because I couldn't fit it all in this piece to make it, work. But that pisses me off. Like you think you're a PC guy, you're like one of the good ones, and you missed it.
So is that decided? So the original mural is coming down and your piece is coming down?
Well, they haven't said anything about my piece, but in my letter to him and op-ed, obviously without the pass, my piece has nothing to wrestle with. There's nothing it's rubbing against, it's,
yeah,
it's so I will take it down.
Right. Okay. Sorry, Amy Chin, you've got a question, and I have unmuted you.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks for your talk, Karyn. That was like amazing. I have two questions. One is kind of related to your presentation, and I'm just wondering what your thought process or what has informed kind of your approach to really thinking about monuments and objects as conversation pieces. So really switching up power dynamics of engaging the viewer and the object in a different relationship, instead of just viewing it's actually starting a conversation, or it's a space like the last piece you kind of talked about with the chairs. it's like an apparatus for conversation. So this is me just reading your work as like this really epistemologically important shift in how we think about object, art, conversation, and power dynamics. And then the second question is about thinking about monuments and objects of the present and future. So it seems like there's a lot of, and I don't know if this is even possible, but the examples you showed, like you used existing kind of historical material. I wonder what like you would produce if you couldn't use any like past material. What would it look like if you like centered a monument on the future, on the future or present? And I know maybe that's like a messed up question because you can't like cut those things up, but I wonder if it's not referential. Yeah.
I feel so, I started art at 30. I started taking ceramics classes at 30, so I kind of came to the art thing later. My MFA's in ceramics. But I think that because I wasn't a kid who came up with worlds, like for me, whenever even my earlier works, when I made like a piece called Coffee Table, it was like this coffee table, an existing one with this column to the ceiling. So I was thinking about like reimagine the mutability of objects. I think because my background's not art, I'm always starting with what's there, or presumptions or assumptions, or this is what we see, but what about the what if, right? So I think for me, it's always for me to be up against something. And I think even without it, like I did a whole series of playground pieces with these slides that kind of collided. I was always thinking about the works as just a catalyst, like they're a space for discourse. I never thought about them as just the thing, like it was always a vehicle to be used. Even when the work was seemingly less political, but to me, the politics have been always there. But I mean, as a Black artist, I find sometimes unless they see the Black body, they don't get it. They don't realize it. So for me, I don't know. I think it'd be hard for me. I love when I'm given something. I think maybe because my background's not art, for me to think about the world, think about citizenship, think about my position, my identity. Being, raised here, but being from Trinidad. I think for me, I can't imagine making a work that's self-contained. I think we're also past that time in art anyway. But for me, it's most exciting when I could be like, okay, this is what's presented, this is what's assumed, and then the what ifs and the research. And then all of a sudden something that was hidden, or I can put a spotlight and that becomes a thing. This thing on the periphery now is in the center. So I don't know. I don't know. That's the challenge. I feel like I'm not good enough artist to start with nothing. I feel like I always have to start with something.
I think
I've been thinking about obelisk a lot. I did have a solo show that closed early at the ICA in Philadelphia. And I did a project with the obelisk I made in Rome in my studio, and like had it travel across the sea and made this video. So I've been still thinking about obelisk. And that's kind of like what would it mean to have the most ancient thing exist? Imagining it for the future, and I'm kind of still thinking about that. So that's just, but again, that's starting with something that's known, like from an ancient Black culture. I don't know if I could start with nothing. Like to me, like this is like I talk to my students. I'm always like, the most I could do for you. Yes, I could teach you skills and all that, but I'm teaching you to be an engaged citizen in the world. That's like my number one job, right? And then from there, we're gonna and how do we make these objects? How do we make these situations? How do we think about matter being speech, being, so I think it's the way I think is because my background wasn't a traditional art background. For me, it has to be considering something outside of yourself. It has to be in conversation with something,
Diane, I think you're unmuted if you want to chime in.
Oh, thank you. Karyn, I have really just a comment as an art historian.
Where are you?
Oh, I'm right here.
Okay.
I'm right next to you, according to me. But I'm an art historian and visual culture historian, and I just find your work a kind of clarion cry to us, and in the fields of art history, in visual culture, architectural history, all of these areas to engage with makers and thinkers around these issues in new and really compelling and extremely important ways. So really just to congratulate you on this wonderful body of work and your capacity to think and look in so many different historical places as well as contemporary and geographical range. And it's really just wonderful. And just to continue your good work.
Means a lot.
Oh.
It's hard.
It is hard, but you also bring the hardness to it. You give us not just the insight into your work, but into your process in a pretty profound way, even in this short lecture. And that is a gift too. That's something important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Larissa, you should be able to have access to the mic now too.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Karyn, for your wonderful talk. I really appreciated your perspective, as well as, the vast amounts of knowledge that you were sharing with us about your work, and as well as the historical kind of perspective around all of these different issues that are really important to us. You kind of answered my question already that Amy asked. So I was at Notre Dame when they decided to take down the Columbus murals in the main building, and I'm also Native American, and as part of the Native American Club there as an undergraduate, we thought we were really crucial in kind of changing the minds and perspectives of the administration, as well as the people who were part of the process in the kind of committees that were formulated to address the issues, the multiple and multidimensional sides of the issues around the removal of the Columbus murals. But what was kind of messed up was that as a student body group who was really crucial in kind of formulating and pushing the boundaries of those decisions, we were never consulted or included as part of that committee. And so I was just kind of wondering, what are your thoughts about how students can be more engaged in this on their campus, as well as, when we're further marginalized, more than we are, how can we be more engaged in these conversations, and how can we continue to push, as well as, I think, while the murals should be removed, they're also going to be conserved, and they're also going to be used as teaching tools rather than being, on full display as an honorarium to Christopher Columbus. So I wanted to agree with what you had said before, that we should be careful about just removing the murals or removing monuments like that without carefully considering how that might be, censorship in a way as well. But I wanted to thank you again for your talk.
I think students seem like they're doing it. The case of the University of Kentucky got really problematic because last year, 2019, the students were having sit-ins, and they had their list of demands, and they threw the fresco back in there. And I'm thinking, I was wondering, are you diluting your cause when you're talking about serious things like the lack of faculty of and then, so I wrote a letter to the students that was published in the newspaper. And then the head of the Black Student Union said, and then it became like, oh my God, students, this generation, I'm a little worried, because they said, well, maybe we shouldn't have chosen a Black immigrant, because the immigrant experience of slavery is different. And I was like, oh my God, wow. And then you hear about all these cases of I heard of this Asian student group put up signs to show the microaggressions, and another group was like, oh my God, those microaggressions, they're like, we're the people who are talking about it. So I worry that, I think I love that young people have an agency now that I didn't have. We're trying to get Dartmouth College to stop supporting the ultra-right racist homophobic paper. That was as far as we can go. So I think there's a lot of agency, but I worry that there was no space for anything. They said, and how could she use gold when most Black churches can have gold? And then the irony of that is the George Floyd casket is gold, golden. So it's kind of a thing where
Oh no.
Hang on, everyone.
So the fact that these students couldn't hear me as an elder who's an artist, who's Black, who's oppressed, it was like, oh no, that there was no space to see. Yes, I chose the gold leaf because of its complexity. I didn't want to, I don't know. I don't know, but I do think certain things are obvious that we should all be rallying behind. And then the Columbus, get that down. Like, students should be fighting for that. But I'm worried that it's like everything. I mean, even at my school, I have students. I mean, my grads have done great things where they're kind of pointing out to the school that we don't have enough art history that's, you know, that's not Western. And it's been a really push, and it's been great with our new dean. But then there are other things where they want to just take independent studies because they want just what they want. Like, it's a weird thing. Like, I only want if it makes sense. I say, but if you don't experience that over there, you may not know that that's what you need to. So there's a weird thing with this generation. I've noticed the last 5 years of teaching where it's so much in their agency, something could be lost to like, okay, if I have to really reckon with and reconcile and work with this, how do you do this? I taught a social practice class, and I had one student, Asian American, first generation, and he was the only person who voted for Trump. And they wanted me to basically expel him from the class. I'm like, this is a social practice class. Kind of crazy he voted for Trump. But I had to make space and I had to, like, when his arguments were false, I had to say no. And when they were valid, I couldn't just dismiss him because he was on the wrong side of the election. So it's a crazy moment, I think, you know? But on the flip side, great things that are happening, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Defunding police from schools, hello. There's no guidance counselors, but we have police. No guidance counselors. Huh? So, yeah, I didn't really answer your question. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's a really complex situation. And then, yeah, just with when you're adding like art to the mix and kind of people's agency and also, you know, like history and like public discourse, I think it's a really complicated issue, but I appreciate your response.
Thanks. It's 12:59. I know you're so busy that you had to turn down your alma mater, Karyn, so we don't want to keep you past time. But thank you. I think also, you know, I sort of sense it from the work, but I sense a lot of parallel thinking in terms of what you're doing in your teaching in your own work, and then also at the Public Humanities Center. I love what you said about, you know, really trying to shape engaged citizens of the world who might be using art to do other things. And that's sort of, you know, very much up our alley and what we're trying to do too. So it was just a huge pleasure to have you here and for you to take the time to do this. Dietrich, do you want to close by anything? Dietrich, who had asked a question before, is I'm just unmuting, is as of tomorrow, or as of midnight tonight, will be the new director of the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities. So
yes.
Thank you. Yes, and I must say this was so inspiring and so wonderful and so deep and really intellectually challenging and helpful, I think, for us, that I think we'll make sure that everyone who wasn't online today will have a chance to and will be asked to see that, because you really contributed so greatly to the discussion that we're having here or will be having at the center. So I can't thank you enough. It was really a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Well, take care, you all. Be safe.
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.